Okay, so we're rolling?
Yep.
Okay, so why do I think that the 928 is such an important car, worthy of collecting, and why do I think it's underappreciated, relative to some other Porsche cars? Okay, so what I would say is that people tend to view Porsche as a car company that started in 1948 that made a 356 that developed from the Volkswagen and then came into their own with the 911, and the Porsche car company is all about the 911. And the 911 is the only Porsche sort of worth collecting, and they made, they have all kinds of fancy 911s, and this one has a rear wing and it's better, and this one doesn't have a rear wing, so it's even better than that, and this one has a carbon roof and so on, and you can get a special color in a 911, etc. And some of them are really rare in their variants, and etc. And so people view the Porsche car company or collecting Porsches as collecting one model that was made from 1960 that defines Porsche. Okay, but I don't think that's right, because it's true that, of course, it's all right. Everybody has their opinions. That's why the hobby is as interesting as it is, and of course everybody's opinion is valid. But what I think, just my opinion, is that I don't view Porsche in the sense of a company that started in 1948, because of course that would be separating Ferry Porsche from Dr. Ferdinand Porsche Sr., who of course made his first car in 1900. And it's not like and Ferry Porsche and Ferdinand Porsche worked together, and they worked together from the 1930s on all of their different projects. Not only that, but Ferdinand Piech, I always get the name, forgive the pronunciation, married into the family, was Ferdinand Porsche's Senior's daughter's husband, Ferry Porsche's brother-in-law. Came into the company in 1960, and he had a profound impact as well with Porsche, and then later with Audi and Bugatti and so on. So I view Porsche as an engineering dynasty that spans over 100 years, almost 125 years, and within that framework, when you're thinking about, well, what are the signature pieces of that dynasty? What did the Porsche Senior, Porsche Junior, Ferdinand Piech, what cars define that dynasty? Well, a 911 does. It was a very successful car. They made millions of 911s. They arguably did a better job of the sports car that was good enough in its production form to modify, to go racing, to win all the races, etc. Certainly the six-cylinder engine that Ferdinand Piech oversaw, which Mezger designed, was drastically overbuilt for its original 130 horsepower, and went on to create 800 horsepower monsters and win all these races. So yeah, that's part of it. It was a very successful car for the company. But did it define the Porsche dynasty? Well, Porsche, I don't think so, not in my mind, because if you're talking about the Porsche dynasty that goes over 120 years, what are the cars to me that really define that? Well, that is to me, 16-cylinder Auto Union car, one of the Silver Arrows, the Cisitalia F1 car that Ferry Porsche built under a design contract with Cisitalia, 1.5 liter twin supercharged 400 horsepower 5-speed synchromesh 4-wheel drive car in like 1947, I think. Cars like the Porsche 917, which Ferdinand Piech, it was an incredibly ballsy move to commit so many of the company's resources to something that sophisticated and to build 25 examples to homologate it for the races. The Porsche 959, which combined four-wheel drive and active suspension and so forth, twin turbo engine in the late 80s. Not just those cars, but it's not really well written about, but the Porsches, both Ferdinand Sr. and Ferry, did a lot of work for the German military, and a lot of incredibly complicated engineering pieces. There's Ferdinand Porsche had a massive tank that was like double the size of anything else that needed 3 other tanks to travel along with it just to pull it out of the mud when it got stuck because it was so heavy. So Ferdinand Porsche Sr. Did the Loaner Porsche 1900. It's an electric car, 2-wheel drive version, a 4-wheel drive version, a hybrid. I don't think he designed his first car powered by gasoline until he got to the Austria Daimler in the mid-teens. He also did the Mercedes SSK. So to me, a Porsche, as part of the Porsche dynasty, the characteristics of that car are an incredibly ambitious engineering project that went way farther than the norm, certainly went way farther than the accountants were comfortable with, where they committed huge sums of money, and Ferdinand Porsche committed huge sums of money for other car companies and usually got in a fight with the accountants at the end and left. That's his history before he was independent. So these incredibly ambitious engineering projects, whether it's the biggest, most powerful tank in the world, whether it's a gasoline electric hybrid road train designed to carry materials over rough terrain, whether the very first electric cars and 4-wheel drive, whether some of the first hybrids, whether it's the 917-30 Can-Am car or the 917 that won Le Mans. So those are the projects to me that make the Porsche dynasty. That to me is what Porsche is. And a 356 and a 911 isn't in that category, not even close. They had a mid-engine car before they had a 356, all aluminum body and so on, that was had more kind of design purity. They went to rear engine only because of economics, because it was easier to produce it and share the profits with Volkswagen. They didn't set out to make a racier hand-built version of a production car, but when they did the initial contract with Adusio with Cisitalia, they saw that he had taken small Fiat mechanicals, put an alloy body on those, and a sporting version of readily available mechanical components, and done very successfully. They started the 356 because of economics, not because they thought that the 356 was the perfect layout for a car. When they came with the 911, they just wanted to make a 356. I'm simplifying, of course, but they make a 356 that could carry some golf clubs, that was a little bit more practical, that could develop the power of the racing engine, 356 variant, a 4-cam engine with 130 horsepower, yet was easier to service and quieter and more economical to run. Okay, so the 911 came about as an evolution of the 356, which was built to give their engineers some work and to make a viable company so they could survive after the war. And then the 911, and Porsche did a masterful job of it, but it was just updated really well over the years when other companies just didn't do as good a job. When they went through the emissions better than most companies, they adapted to the bumper requirements in the early 70s better. They kept the concept, whereas other companies deviated, and that all worked extremely well for them. And now they've found that they can, spin off an endless series of limited edition variants, and they just get snapped up, instantly, and it's a huge cash cow. I think they probably make more GT3 variants of a 911 than they do regular cars. If you want a really rare current 911, get a base rear-wheel drive car. That's a rare car, not necessarily the GT3s. Okay, not that I don't love GT3s and they're great cars, but it wasn't a cost no object, ambitious engineering initiative where they, bet a huge amount of their capital and tried to create something that hadn't been done before in a better way, and advancing, automotive technology, beyond what else was out there. That isn't a 356 or a 911, in my opinion. It's true of a Mercedes SSK. It's true of the Auto Union Grand Prix car. It's true of the Sistalia F1 car. It's true of the 959. It's true of the 917. Arguably the 919 Le Mans car, which some people have said is the most complicated race car ever made. So those cars all fit that idea, that ambition. And where I'm getting with all of this, if you stayed with me this far, is that's a 928 too. Okay, the 928 fits in with this Porsche desire to create the most advanced, best product, cost no object, do something else that nobody had done before, and advance automotive engineering relative to what was out there, and commit all their resources to this lofty ideal of making the best product they could make for the design objectives. That's a 928, okay? That's why I think it's an important car. Porsche people are resistant to change. When they went from a split window 356 to curved glass, people complained that it wasn't a real 356 anymore because it had curved glass and not split glass. When they made the 911, journalists, even Dennis Jenkinson famously, said, well, the 911's too soft, it's too much of a grand touring car, it's not a real car like a 356. A 356, you really have to know how to drive it because you need to wipe the road with it, which is basically lurid oversteering, and the 911's too tame. And then, but when people, get used to it, they just don't like the change. But the whole history of Porsche fans and fanatics and so on is incredibly resistant to it. So when the 911 came along, or the 928 came along, and the 911 had been produced for, since 1964, and now we're getting to 1978, people didn't think that a water-cooled front-engine grand touring sports car was a Porsche anymore, which I think is, it's the way it is, but I think it's silly. So what happened? The genesis of the 928 came about in the early 70s. Porsche was just looking to survive. They had one car, which is a 356. They were trying to come up with different ideas, and they were small, so they needed to form partnerships and so on with other companies, including VW. Ferry Porsche wanted to have an off-road vehicle based on the 356. They created something called a Hunter, which they didn't get a commission to build. They were always searching for, new product lines just to keep the lights on. They had an association with Volkswagen, and they were going to come out with a new Volkswagen, the successor to the Beetle. It was a small sedan, and this is a massive project that Porsche was working on, with virtually half their company dedicated to this one VW. It was a water-cooled inline-4 sedan where the engine was, mid-engined, beneath the passenger seat, and they were going to spin off a 4-cylinder version for Volkswagen and a flat 8 water-cooled engine for Porsche. And they got this project, like I said, it took up half their company, half their resources, and they got it to the prototype stage, and VW had a change in their chairman. The new chairman came in and just took one look at it and said, we're not doing that, that's too expensive. and proceeded to develop the line of Golfs, which eventually replaced the Beetle. That left Porsche in a situation in, I think, 1971, where they, half their staff didn't have anything to do, and they didn't have any projects. And so they had to come up with a new car. They had just completed their 917 project. They'd won Le Mans in 70 and 71. Ferdinand Piëch, who orchestrated that program, had now left for Audi because there was some infighting with the Porsche family members. They decided that Porsche or Piëch family members wouldn't manage the company. They handed that over to Ernest Furman. Ernest Furman joined Porsche in the late 40s as a design engineer. He had a thesis on, he had a doctorate with a thesis on high RPM valve trains for internal combustion engines. He developed the 4-cam 550 engine with the bevel gears and the perpendicular shafts to drive all the valve gear. That was the famous Carrera engine. So Furman started with the company, developed this 4-cam engine, left and came back as the chairman of Porsche, just as Ferdinand Piëch left. And then it was under him that decided that they were going to create a the most advanced production car they could. The emissions regulations worldwide, particularly in the US, were uncertain, and they were reluctant to commit resources to another air-cooled car for fear that it wouldn't pass new emissions. They decided the safest thing to do would be to follow the, let's say, American route and do a water-cooled front-engine car, because they knew that if that's what the US was producing, that the likelihood of the regulations would suit their car too. And they set out to create the world's best sports car, the world's best GT car, with a clean sheet of paper. This was the first road car that Porsche had ever done from a clean sheet of paper. The original 356 production car. The original 356 wasn't. The 911 was a derivative of the 356. Every part of the 928 was new, it was fresh, and when it came out, it was like it would have been a spaceship. It took European Car of the Year, it wowed everybody. The minute journalists drove this car, they just said that, it just makes everything else look old. I mean, I'll demonstrate this by saying that, this 928, which is the 1981, is the same year, well, within 1 year of this 1982 Citroën 2CV. Okay, so you could be shopping for a new car, and you could look at the, arguably the opposite end of the price spectrum, but you could buy that car, which was designed in the 30s. You could, if you wanted a Mercedes, this was the top of the line Mercedes. This was a 500 SLC. Okay, that was Mercedes, top of the line, except for the 6.9 sedan, sporting car. And if you look at the 928 and compare it, there's no comparison at all. I mean, this car was literally a spaceship. These bumpers, they're like polyurethane bumpers that are molded, and the technology that goes into the mounting, and the paint that had to be developed to not crack if the bumper was deformed. That's a first for the 928. Okay, so they pioneered that. Other cars had rear transaxles. I mean, the Lancia Aurelia B20 had that in the 1950s. But we've got a powerful V8 engine. The construction of the block is unique in this car, where it doesn't have like big end caps to cover the engine bearings. Basically, the whole crank is sandwiched in these aluminum girdles, and that comes right out of racing technology. Ford Cosworth DFV, the F1 engine at the time, had a similar system. And so they came out with a lot of firsts on this car, and they came out with a high-speed tourer that at 120 or 130, 150 miles an hour was absolutely rock solid. There's a very sophisticated rear suspension that prevents the toe out when the car is turning, and they call that a Wysack axle, and that's to tame oversteer that the 911s were known for. And there's lots of information you can read about a 928, but the point I'm making is that when it came out, it was so far more advanced than anything else on the market, as to make everything else look kind of silly. It got European Car of the Year, which no sports car has ever got before or since. And it's because of that reason, I'm finally coming to a conclusion here, and again, thank you for viewing. For that reason, the 928 is an example of the best engineering of the Porsche dynasty between Ferdinand Porsche and Ferry Porsche. And when it came out, it achieved its objectives, and it was a massive milestone in automotive design. And that's why a 928 should be known as should be a very collectible car. Because in time, I believe people will realize the significance of it. And I also think that in time, people will, well, maybe they won't, but they should, think about Porsche as not just a company that makes one model, but think of Porsche in the scope of Ferdinand Porsche Sr. and Ferry Porsche working together for the better part of 100 years and completing these amazing engineering triumphs, let's say. That's my point about why 928 should be collectible.